Hello, everyone. Welcome to the RotoWire Fantasy Football Live Show. Remember, we're here 5 days a week, 11 a.m. Eastern Time. If you missed the show, you can always catch the replay on RotoWire YouTube. And during the preseason, we take off Thursdays and Fridays. However, 1 week from now is the Fantasy Football Expo weekend, the Kings Classic weekend. So next weekend on Saturday, August 12th, Sunday the 13th, I will be off the grid. So I will miss those shows as well, but we'll be here every other day, 5 days a week, as always, bringing you the best we can and help you get ready for those fantasy football drafts. Remember, if you've been liking the show, it'd be awesome if you could consider hitting that like and subscribe button if you're on RotoWire YouTube. Lets the bosses know if the show is something you value. It helps me out. Again, if you wouldn't mind following me on socials, that'd be great. At Jim Coventry NFL. I do put up 5 Twitter or X, whatever we call it these days, player threads to let you break down a player a bit. Again, make your determinations on how you want to draft your fantasy team. Finally, don't leave the show. End of the show. Got a great guest today, Nate Markham, Fantasy and Frames, Fantasy Pros, IDP specialist, but he knows everything about offensive side of the football. He's going to talk about player he's targeting in 2023 fantasy football drafts. All right, usually we start out here with the news and the notes of the day. Realistically, there was like next to nothing yesterday, but we got plenty to talk about. So this is a great opportunity to talk about the players I'm targeting in drafts. If you follow myself regularly, these names you've come across, but I'm going to go over a little bit of my draft strategy. It's always pliable. That's the first thing I want to point out. What I always recommend when you're drafting, more than J-Red, is when you're drafting, I don't like doing the top 300 list or whatever it is, numbers you need, 150, depending what your draft is. I have that list, but when I'm drafting, what I like, KJ Frederick, good morning. What I like is I have my list of quarterbacks, running backs, receivers, and tight ends. And I delete as the players get taken off the board. I want to be very cognizant of the rate at which players at each position are falling off that board. So I see my comfort level of when I feel in a draft I need to attack a certain position before maybe a certain tier level dries up, or I'm looking a few rounds ahead thinking, okay, am I going to be able to get an RB3 at some point? And again, it may cause me to act, but having a preset plan is fine for a draft, but having those positional lists allows you, as I call it, the pliability, flexibility to make those changes, because every draft has a different flow to it. And the more drafts you do, the more comfortable you become with that. And if you are one that just does your home league or two, I'd recommend doing even a couple dollar. Best ball's a little different because you're drafting some players maybe for spike weeks, but nonetheless, that drafting practice helps you get used to navigating a draft board. So the quarterbacks that I'm targeting, obviously, many people are going in the second, early third round to take one of those top 3 quarterbacks. People are loving Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen, Jalen Hurts, and clearly it's a great strategy. I'm not shopping there. I just, on principle, I don't want those running backs and wide receivers falling away from me. Maybe I'm a little old school there, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to shop in different levels. And I have rosters with quarterbacks in each of these tiers, so I'll go through them. So often what will happen is those first 3 quarterbacks go off the board, and usually after the next 1 or 2 get drafted, I'm shopping. If I like the round and the value, my tier 2 quarterbacks, and that whole tier 2 is very good. I mean, I'm going to talk about Justin Fields and Justin Herbert, Joe Burrow's in that group, Lamar Jackson. I really don't think you can go wrong with any of those. The 2 I'm targeting, because Lamar Jackson is really getting pushed up drafts a bit. He's frequently going as the QB4, not always, but he's been. So Justin Fields, the reason I like Justin Fields is, remember, last year, he wasn't even turned loose as a runner for a significant time into the season, yet he posted the second most rushing yards ever by a quarterback. Now, not expecting to say, all right, 1,000 yards, we're done deal. But we know the rushing floor he has. And I know he did get an injury late in the season, but his speed and size, they are just game changing. And I do believe the Bears are going to see what they have in terms of his ability to be their quarterback of the future. And so what they're going to have to do is they're going to have to let him pass the ball. Last year, it was really one arm tied behind his back. And then down the stretch, he didn't have receivers. Mooney got hurt, and basically it was Cole Kmet and a bunch of guys that are number 4s and 5s on legitimate NFL rosters. Well, now you bring in DJ Moore. Chase Claypool was terrible last year, but like I said, you can't change teams in the middle of the season unless you're an elite superstar receiver without a training camp. And so Claypool could be decent, not targeting him in fantasy, and Mooney. So he's got targets. Justin Herbert, we've been talking about for a long time. So Justin Herbert, I'm only going to point out the weapons they've added, the downfield potential that they want to integrate into the offense. Justin Herbert, from a talent point, is one of the very top quarterbacks in the league. And I do believe this is the year they're going to get him back. He had 41 total touchdowns the second season. So it's not like he had, and 5,000 yards. So it's not like he hasn't done it before. So even if he just goes back to that level, that puts him right at the level of those top quarterbacks. Morning, Albert. Quick question. Well, since Burrow's brought up here, I can talk about this. Burrow has the injury. Would I chase him before Diggs or AJ Brown? I guess I'll just speak to very quickly about Burrow. So Jamar Chase made a comment yesterday recommending that Burrow sits out till week 5 and gets all the way better. He's got a calf strain. Right now, to be ready for the season, he had about 6 weeks. To me, I'm not a doctor. Most calf strains are good in 6 weeks. Now, Chase saying wait 5 weeks, that's like a 3-month timetable. To me, very unlikely. And remember, Burrow's a pocket passer. He can run a little bit, but he doesn't have to. And they have him in shotgun anyway. Morning, Randy. So they have him in shotgun, so it's not really an issue. So Joe Burrow, I think if there's going to be that comment makes a little drop in ADP, I think it's a buying opportunity. I'm not into the idea that he's going to miss any real time. All right. So anyway, I mentioned my tier 2 quarterbacks, Fields and Herbert. Now, tier 3, if I miss that whole tier where those 2 players, Fields and Herbert, Burrow's out, Lamar Jackson, I'm still good. Both Trevor Lawrence and Deshaun Watson are players who I do feel are going to have phenomenal seasons, and they could compete for quarterbacks in the tier above them. So I am not frustrated at all when it falls to those 2. Lawrence gets Ridley in there. He's on a career arc where this 3rd year, I expect him to be even better. And he cleaned up some of those really bad interceptions down the stretch as well. So I was very excited about that, to see that. So I really think that we are in good shape with him. But Deshaun Watson, I've said this on many different shows, not going to go over this in painful detail, but it was very clear to me that after almost 2 years away, he couldn't process the game speed. And I already heard in camp, it's back. And what we need is this. So basically, when you can't process the speed of the game because you fall behind, you're thinking. And you're not. The thinking's the last thing you want to do on an NFL field. You want to know what's in front of you and process and just do it. And apparently, Watson says he is no longer thinking and he is just ripping it. And so I think he is completely back, and I like his weapons. Tier 4. Now, if I miss out on these and it becomes DEFCON 5 and it's not a good situation, I am willing to take Anthony Richardson. I don't like the Jonathan Taylor news attached to that, but I still believe Richardson is 900 rushing yard floor. And so, and the ceiling's not much higher probably, but I do expect him to get around 900 yards. He is just an athletic marvel, and they're going to run such heavy personnel. Defenses are not equipped to deal with the level of heavy personnel the Colts are going to put on the field. And then if Richardson gets to the second level and teams have overstacked, lights out. Kirk Cousins isn't a bad tier 4 quarterback either. We know he'll have those 2 or 3 implosion games every year, but their defense projects to be really bad, and they add Jordan Addison into the mix on offense, so they have weapons. They should have game script that should be very favorable. So those are second-tier quarterbacks, and if I'm in a super flex or 2 quarterback league, I love having Richardson and Cousins as my second quarterback if I didn't take an elite option, but I definitely want to pair together, Lawrence and Watson along with Richardson and Cousins. Those are real nice pairings. Now, super late picks, if you're in a super flex league, it gets thin very quick. And these are like number 3 quarterbacks. So you need 3 quarterbacks, in my opinion, in these super flex 2 quarterback leagues. Injury, quarterback score the points. Jordan Love's a flyer. We don't know what he is, but we do know that he has requisite weapons as a third quarterback. Again, he's job stability, and I think that's huge. Mac Jones is another one. I'm not sure about his job stability because Bill Belichick apparently was pissed at him from last year. But that said, Bill O'Brien comes in to coach. He ran an RPO based offense with Mac Jones at Alabama. Juju Smith-Schuster, I've been out on him many years, but he's very good against zone in RPO schemes. So I think he gets help there. I think the tight end helpfulness is going to be there for him. And then Gag again on this third one. But again, we're looking third quarterback. This is all bottom of the barrel stuff. But if you're really desperate at the end, Baker Mayfield, he has Godwin, he has Evans. Again, he's a third quarterback. He's the 30th quarterback off the board. You're at a point, there's nothing out there. My guess is he easily beats Kyle Trask. And my thought process is he should play well enough to keep the job. And sometimes you just need a body out there. So I get it. Gag on Baker Mayfield. But again, 30 quarterbacks off the board, 3 quarterbacks because you needed a third one in the super flex. You find there. Hey, everybody, let's compete for $250,000 in a free RotoWire subscription by playing the NFFC Beat Jim Coventry 3 draft. That's on Tuesday, August 15th, 8 p.m. Eastern. It's a little more than a week away. That draft's going to be live streamed. Everybody who drafts with me will be featured in that live stream. You can sign up on the link that's on my Twitter page at Jim Coventry NFL. It's pinned right there, so you can find that. I'll see if I have a couple quick questions before I get moving here. Let's see here. League's a keeper, keeping Hurts for a 6th round. Yep, great there. And let's see if anything else here. Ranking CeeDee Lamb, Garrett Wilson, and St. Brown. I'll do this quickly. So CeeDee Lamb, I do have him ahead of Garrett Wilson, but man, I think Garrett Wilson has an insane level of upside. He had 1,100 yards with no quarterback play last year. I think Garrett Wilson's the guy. I like him at that first, second turn, because he's going now. He's people are on him, but CeeDee Lamb is equally good. So I do think CeeDee Lamb or Garrett Wilson, they're kind of like right there. I do have Lamb slightly ahead of Wilson in the rankings. St. Brown, I have third. I don't think St. Brown has anywhere near the ability to reach the ceiling that Lamb and Wilson have. Brown has a phenomenal floor, but Lamb and Wilson have that same floor. I don't think St. Brown is anywhere in the ballpark of the ceiling. And I think you bring in Jahmyr Gibbs, who's going to run routes, middle of the field. And I think at some point, Jameson Williams is back. So we'll see what happens there. And then quickly on drafting Jonathan Taylor. Right now, it's really tough to click the draft button on him. Very tough. And if he gets to the 3rd round, yeah, I guess so. But he's a player before the turmoil. I had him as my running back 2. I had him ahead of Austin Eckler, but I'm very nervous right now. Randy, my tiers don't shift much for 6 point. I know Justin Fields he's really the one. He's the one at 6 point passing TDs. You could totally justify moving him to the bottom of that tier and maybe even below Trevor Lawrence. He's the one you could make the move with that, but I'm not making much of a move on that. And Chubb or AJ Brown PPR 2nd round. Nick Chubb and AJ Brown are both going to be elite options, obviously. But in the 2nd round, the running back level Chubb's going to see probably light boxes the first time in his career. As much as I love Brown, I just think the level of running back I can get from Chubb, it's one that I want on my roster. It's easier to collect some receivers later, I think, than running backs. And Chubb, I do expect him to have nearly a career year this year, but you can't go wrong with either. It's really hard to shy away from either. AJ Brown even has upside beyond last year. All right, so I am going to talk about running backs I'm targeting in drafts right now. And I just mentioned Nick Chubb, and he's my tier 1 player that I am targeting. You usually could get him in the early 2nd round. So if you're picking early in the draft, you don't have access to him. If you're one of the first 4 or 5 picks, I wouldn't take him there. And then by the time it's come on the wraparound, he's going to be gone. So you pretty much need to be picking 9 or later. And 9 is kind of iffy if he gets back. But if you're picking 10, 11, or 12, yeah, definite 2nd round pick. And then tier 3, the tier 2, I'm taking a receiver where my tier 2 guys are. Najee Harris and Travis Etienne are very strong 3rd tier running backs for me. Najee Harris, just don't forget last year, he had that foot injury preseason. He had a metal plate in his shoe, and he was trying to run on it, and he played the whole way through. But after the week 9 bye, he was a different player. To me, that showed me the foot was healed. He had all of his 80-plus yard games. He had his 20 carry games. He only had a high of 17 carries. He had like a 15 and a 17 through week 8, and he wasn't getting work because they knew he was hurt. So he was a different back, but you're getting him at a discount because people are expecting this buzz about Jalen Warren, who's a fine player, but Najee Harris is a completely another level of player when he's healthy, like we saw in the second half. Travis Etienne, I do worry he loses early down work, but we saw last year he was around 5. I want to say, on the top of my head, I want to say he was 5.1 yards per carry. I could be a little off on it, but yards per carry were excellent. When they used him as a receiver, it was 9 yards per catch, 9.1, I believe. And they never gave more than 3 catches in a game. And I know Doug Peterson is not a big proponent of that, but I do have to hope they get him a bit more involved in the passing game. Tier 4, Aaron Jones is a player I enjoy rostering on teams. I think that he gets undersold. He's going to be needed heavily in this offense. And there's times the offensive coaching staff has gone away from him. Last year, though, down the stretch, remember this, he had taken that job completely from A.J. Dillon. Dillon was just like an afterthought. And then remember that Jones was dealing with either an ankle or a foot late in the season, and then he was losing work. But that's not indicative of that. And I do think Aaron Jones is strong there. Tier 5, I really think you could clean up a bit. You're waiting into your 40s or later on picks. Dameon Pierce, he may get a knock. He had some really tough games last year on the schedule, and he still produced for fantasy. The Titans clearly stoned him, but they stone everybody down, right? Cam Akers, again, you might hate the player, but I do believe that Sean McVay is going to have some schemed up running situations and success going. He seems to be committed back to Akers as a 3-down back, and the usage would be good. There'll be some down weeks, but I think overall they're going to make good use of him. And again, on Twitter, I have my threads. I just don't get why people hate James Conner. He's playing 90% of the snaps. He has no competition. He averaged over 20 PPR points from week 10 on last year with the garbage line, most of it without Kyler Murray. The worst case scenario is he gets the same situation. Their line could be a little better. A little bit later, tier 6, Antonio Gibson in your PPR leagues. Look, last year we were out on him. This year we're in on him. The coach, Ron Rivera, wears his heart on his sleeve. Basically, he said last year he was out on Gibson. This year, loves him as a receiver. He runs routes. I saw him run a deep corner route last year. Thing of beauty, makes a great catch. He can run routes. So he'll be, and with J.D. McKissick, remember, McKissick's gone, played about half a season, 40 targets. There's a good chance that Gibson flirts with 70 catches in the PPR league. It's beautiful. I'm warming up a lot on James Cook. He's going to see light boxes. His usage did go up a little late in the season. Damien Harris is there, could be a bit of an obstacle. But I think if Cook shows the explosiveness that we've seen that he can have, then I do believe that James Cook will get 8 to 10 carries in games, but he'll also catch some passes. And I do believe that this is a buying opportunity because he's going about 70 or so picks in the drafts. And I think if you need a running back there, I do think he is going to have a very solid breakout season here. Question about Chubb or Pollard. It's going to be Chubb all day long for me. I think Chubb is going to be an elite fantasy play, PPR or not. He is going to be a phenomenal asset in that offense. Finally, digging really late, Jamaal Williams, over 100 picks in the drafts. Definitely solid play with him because he's going to get where coaches love him. And I get it. People are talking up Kendra Miller. Beautiful. I get it. But Jamaal Williams is on a team. He does everything he's supposed to, runs exactly where the play is designed, blocks, adjusts when it's called for, veteran leadership. They love him. And every coach loves him. And obviously when he needs to get money, then they move on from him. But they gave him enough money to play here. And Kamara's out 3 games. So Williams get a heavy workload then. Miller can show well, but I still think Jamaal Williams late. And then really late, Tyler Algier. Even if Bijan Robinson, let's say he gets 65% of the rushing attempts Atlanta had last year. That's probably in the 350 range. They ran 579 times. There is a lot left over for a change of pace back. The Chicago backfield is muddy. Diontae Foreman is lately, sometimes it's Roschon, sometimes Diontae is the cheapest piece. Either can be, but I think people are underselling Diontae Foreman. I think once the Bears kind of get into the mix of things, I really feel they're not going to be able to shy away from him because he is a beast on early downs. Did it for half a season in Tennessee, did it for a half a season in Carolina last year, and obviously Derrick Henry went down the first year. They traded McCaffrey when he was with the Panthers. So performance in it. Gus Edwards really late. Nobody gave Edwards a pass for the ACL he had 2 years ago. Last year he wasn't himself, but he is still the number 2 in that backfield. And I know they're going to pass more. Gus Edwards is still getting work. So again, you're getting him super late in drafts as depth. You want him as depth on your fantasy team. And oh man, very unfortunately for me, but I bet a Chase Edmonds all summer as a late pick. And then of course, Jenna McLean, who writes for covers the beat for them, starts talking him up as the third down back. Everybody thinks that Rachaad White is this 3-down guy. Well, Dave Canales, the offensive coordinator, he coached against Edmonds for years, and he realizes what Edmonds is, and it kind of might be out of the bag, but I think it might stay under the radar a little bit longer. But you're getting Edmonds super late in drafts. I think that he is. Remember, when he was at Miami, he was horrible, but what happened was then he got traded to Denver. He had a high ankle sprain, but the last couple of games, he showed us the same Chase Edmonds that he was in Arizona. He just was not a scheme fit in Miami. I'm a commissioner in a whole lot of leagues, but getting people together for a draft is really painful. We got different time zones, people all over the place, families. So RotoWire now has a tool. It's called a scheduler, and this helps you get all 12, however many people you have coordinated for drafts. Just go to rotowire.com/scheduler. All right. We're about 9 minutes away from bringing Nate Markham in, and I told the teaser for the show was defenses to avoid, but you know what? I'll only go a minute or two on those because a lot of us aren't playing with defense. I'll give you quick stories on those. I think I have time to get to my receivers I'm targeting. So first of all, in the first round, any of the top 5 receivers. If I'm picking in the first round, clearly Jefferson, Chase, Tyreek Hill, fine. You know, we get Cooper Kupp is supposed to be fine on his injury. You fade him if you want because of age. I get it, completely get it. But he was the wide receiver 1 points per game last year before he got hurt. And so I still think that, Stafford's iffy. But if he's the 5th receiver off the board, I'm fine with that. But any of those top guys, we're not going to worry. Garrett Wilson's the player I'm really eyeballing. He falls frequently to the early second round. Sometimes he goes right at the turn. So again, it's depending where you're picking in drafts, whether you have access to him. If you're picking in the first 4 or 5 spots, most likely in most drafts, he's not making it back to you in a second. So you're not going to have him, and that's fine. But if you're anywhere near that turn, yeah, Garrett Wilson, I do believe that 1,100 yards last year with no quarterback play, it was insane. He got 82 of 147 targets, very uncatchable level of passes. And so I just think that with Aaron Rodgers here, and look, you might hate him, Nathaniel Hackett, though. Again, I keep referring back to an athletic show, The Athletic, one of their shows, and it was an interview with somebody that covered the beat for the Packers back in the day, and it was said that Devontae Adams was the number 1 read on a stunning 70% of pass plays, and with no competition for a real legitimate number 2. Allen Lazard's a great blocker and a situational receiver, but Garrett Wilson, under Hackett's offensive coordinatorship, can easily see a ridiculous amount of targets, and he's super talented. And so I just think he's that player you want to get pieces of. Tier 4, Amari Cooper and DJ Moore. Again, I told you earlier that I do think Deshaun Watson will figure out the speed of the game. I think he actually has done that already based on camp reports. And Cooper is the number 1. There's target competition there, but Cooper is a phenomenal route runner, and regardless of what the defense throws at them, he's going to present an open look for his quarterback. DJ Moore, a lot of people are down on him. He had a rough year last year, but he had 3 1,150 plus yard seasons the prior 3 seasons. And so now, look, I think Justin Fields is going to be a good quarterback. I mean, a great quarterback. Maybe he will. I think he'll be good. I don't think he's a bum in any way. I think he's going to be able to throw the ball well. And I think the speed and the separation that DJ Moore provide, I think that's going to be a very attractive target. And he's going, look, the Bears haven't had a receiving group. They have a receiving group now. To me, they made a commitment to want to throw the ball. I said earlier, they have to see what Fields is for them. They can't just blindly go through another year and have him hand the ball off all day, because they got to make an organizational decision. Is he our future quarterback, or do we have to go elsewhere? This is the year they find out, and they're going to throw. Tier 5, you hear me over and over again. I love Mike Williams. I think the offense is going to be more downfield based. when he had 8 or more targets in games last year, it was insane the production he had. And then we have Chris Godwin, who again, and actually, you know what? Nate, Mark, I'm going to introduce you in a bit, but since you're sitting in the waiting room, I'll let you come in here and then we'll go. I'm kind of going through some of my receivers on the board, but we got a few minutes, so I'll have you on a couple things I'm saying, then we'll introduce you for your segment. Sound good?
Sounds wonderful.
All right. So I'm talking about receivers that I'm targeting, and I was in tier 5, and I point out with Chris Godwin, and people are gag on Baker Mayfield, but I'll tell you this. Jarvis Landry averaged 997 yards and 79 receptions with Mayfield. If you're on schedule and you're where you're supposed to be, he could get the ball to somebody on schedule. It was never going to work with Odell Beckham, one of the greatest freelancers of our time. That wasn't Mayfield. But Godwin, to me, he has a very, very solid floor in that offense. Nate, do you hate Godwin this year? Or do you like him?
I don't know if I'm probably in the middle. I don't know if I love. I don't know if I hate. I like where he's going from a target just floor. Like I feel comfortable more with Godwin than I do with Evans. Evans scares me more, but Evans also, that's baked in. His ADP is dropping, and I just find myself avoiding those guys because I really don't like Tampa, but somebody's got to catch the ball. We know that. That's like a guarantee, right? You know, you're going to have some volume. So that's about where I'm at on Godwin.
Yeah, and then a few other quick ones. Elijah Moore and Brandon Cooks are in my tier 7. Cooks is going to be cast as a number 2 for the first time in a good while. Disgruntled employee last year. I feel like in the Dallas offense that they do run at a faster pace. They'll probably run the ball more than we were used to. But between their pace of play, Cooks should get enough targets to cash in. I do worry their defense may be so good that there may not be enough scoring, but we're talking tier 7. Elijah Moore fits in there as well. I believe that he had a raw deal in New York with the Jets, but we saw those last 6 games he played as a rookie when he averaged 576 and he scored 5 of 6 games. And now they're actually moving him all around the formation in Browns camp. They're even playing him at the X occasionally. They ran him out of the backfield, but I think this is a speedy weapon with agility they're going to make use of. Either of these guys do it for you?
I've always been a Brandon Cooks fan. You know, he's always been tried and true, plugging 1,000 yards no matter where he's at, no matter who the quarterback is. And now he actually has, not now he actually has, because he had a good quarterback before. Obviously in New England it wasn't terrible. But yeah, now he's I still think he's the second mouth to feed. But Elijah Moore is the one that really stands out to me. You touched earlier, you're talking about Deshaun Watson being in that second tier, that third tier for you if you miss out. And I'm right there with you. I think you hit it exactly right. The game speed, you could tell, was behind him. He was scrambling a lot more towards the end of the season last year because you could tell he wasn't processing the second reads. And Elijah Moore gives him, honestly, maybe one of the best second reads he's had because he's never had that person in the slot over the middle. If they keep him there, I think he could play very sneaky as that consistent 6-7 target guy.
So everybody's waiting for Nate to talk about his players. I promise very quickly, I tell you defense to avoid. I'm going to give you a couple sentences on each because I don't think we're going to dwell too much. Look, the Patriots have a lot of talent on their defense, but they lack high-end talent. And when we've seen this before, they played a bunch of backup quarterbacks last year. When they play a strong offense and in their division, they're going to have some games against those. They just do not stack up against them. I'm fading the Patriots at a high pick. The Saints, look, they have a lot of good things, but their secondary isn't as great as we think. Marshawn Lattimore is a bit more up and down than we'd like. He's strong in certain types of receivers. I also think that they've lost some infrastructure to their defense. They've tried to replace that, but that infrastructure is huge. Cam George getting a little bit older. Tyrann Mathieu. People love the Saints, a top 10 defense. Again, when they play a good offense, I don't think they can slow down a good offense. And finally, Denver Broncos, they lose their DC from last year, Evero, and I thought that was a really great coaching job. They have a good secondary. Patrick Surtain is definitely elite, but their pass rush is tricky. Randy Gregory misses time. Baron Browning started on fire last year, faded as the year went on. I think if you're outside the top 12, fine, but earlier, we're going to go with those. Any of those defenses that you think are way better than I mentioned, either New England, New Orleans, or Denver?
So New England has the one area when you're targeting defenses alongside turnovers, obviously big plays, sack totals for New England should be okay. That's the one area I think Matthew Judon's very underrated. They signed Judon on with the red sleeves. And also, if you want to follow that player, I know it's not IDP, but red sleeves giveaway. Always follow Judon. And Marte Mapu is a rookie that came in this year. I really like the skill set he brings. I think that they have some safeties that could be blitzing alongside like Kyle Duggar. Maybe they could be a sneaky sack upside team, but I don't disagree with the way you explained that they're not as dominant as what we kind of expect.
So now we formally bring in Nate Markham because it's half past the hour and people who are coming in for Nate, you finally got your opportunity. Nate Markham, you can find him at Fantasy and Frames. I've been blessed to be on that show a couple times. He does work for Fantasy Pros. Nate is not just redraft, but he's an IDP genius. He's a top 5 ranker. And I want to say he was number 1 year. You can fix me on that in a minute. You can find him on the Shoot the Gap pod, the Fourth and Frames pod. Nate Markham is somebody who I always enjoy talking football with. Nate, give everybody a quick hello and we'll get you into your players for today.
Hey, everybody. Thank you, Jim. This is one of the treats for me for sure. Because outside of just, I love how you bring football into fantasy instead of fantasy into football. And that's not a knock by any means. It's the way that I love to approach it. And it's great to talk like football and how that incorporates into it. And you're one of the best at it. And so I'm blessed to be on here as much as you say you come on our show. You're a friend and I get to see you in about 5 days.
Yes.
I can't wait.
Football Expo weekend. Yeah. And Nate, if you haven't figured out from the few words he's already said, Nate sees it the way I do. Nate understands the NFL. And, I'm pretty decent knowing the defenses and the scheme. Nate is like 3rd or 4th level beyond me in that area. And you are, and that's a good thing. And so Nate has that keen understanding of NFL, and it really helps him to be a phenomenal analyst. He's going to talk about 4 players today that you should be drafting. One is a player that I just think needs to continue to be sold to people who have a little bit of uncertainty. And then the other 3 are going to be later in drafts, but these are all going to be gems. So Nate, we're going to start off at the running back position here. And this is a player in some prior years had been going as a first-round pick when we used to get 6-7 running backs in the first round. But now this player you're going to talk about, we're seeing spill into the early 2nd round. Tell us which running back you like early in drafts and why.
You teased him earlier, and that's Nick Chubb. And this was before all the running back conundrum with Jonathan Taylor, with Saquon, with Josh Jacobs, with J.K. Dobbins, et cetera. And by me listing those 3 running backs right there should give you inclination to possibly move Nick Chubb up into the 1st round. Hey, keep drafting him in the 2nd. I would gladly pair him with one of the elite receivers at the end and have a dynamic 1-2 start. I'm pushing Nick Chubb into the middle of my 1st round. I have him, honestly, I'm taking him ahead of Eckler in some situations. And I know that's blasphemous by some. I just wonder if like the vertical approach by Kellen Moore will take some of those targets away, or at least some of the rushing upside from Eckler. Still love Eckler, would never pass on. This isn't an indoctrination against the other running backs. It's more so saying trust in consistency, trust in skill set, and trust and opportunity. And that's what Nick Chubb brings this year. And that, the skill set we clearly know is there. I think he's the most talented running back in the NFL. I think people can make arguments for others, Christian McCaffrey, et cetera. And I'm not going to argue that, but what he's done every single year is he's finished 5th overall in rushing, 2nd, 7th, 2nd, 4 top, 7 finishes. The hard thing is in half-point PPR, everybody wants to penalize him for the reception upside. And I get that. And it shows because in those 4 seasons where he's finished in the top 7, he's been the RB 5, 11, 9, 7. Never a number 1 or 2 because in those same seasons you talked about, we had CMC with 100-plus targets. We had Saquon with 100-plus targets, Eckler, and the list goes on of those guys. And you pretty much only are relying on the yardage and the touchdowns, which is fine because the touchdowns have been there. 8+ touchdowns in 4 straight seasons. Jim, how many running backs have done that since 2018?
He's probably it.
There's 1 more. Derrick Henry.
The big dog. That's the broken foot year. He still got it.
Still got
8 games and he still got it.
And then if you go to 2019, it's Josh Jacobs. So there's the consistency that I want. Skill set, obviously, as I said, the best running back. I mean, so here's one thing I found. If you look at the missed forced tackles produced last year, he had 93 of them. 93. The second highest was 66. 27 less missed tackles. Explosive rate was there. And then the opportunity, of course, like we said, without Kareem Hunt. Last year with Deshaun Watson in those weeks was at 13 through 18. He had the same target share as Kareem Hunt -1. So I'm not saying take all that work and pass it to Chubb. I'm not saying Jerome Ford's going to come in and take all that either. But let's say he occupies the majority of those. Now, all of a sudden, you have a season where those last 5 weeks, he would have 25 targets. Extrapolate that. We don't like extrapolation, right? We hate that word. But do that, and I think he can eclipse that 49 target number that he had in 2019. So I'm all in on Chubb. I've taken him as high as 5, which is crazy. But that was, we did an NBC draft with our friend Gary Davenport, and I told Gary in foreshadowing, I had the number 1 pick. I said, I want to take Chubb here because I know that you're sitting at 5 and you are thinking about it. And he wouldn't tell me, but that's exactly what it was. I couldn't pull the trigger at him at 1. So I hear you're high on Chubb, so that's good to hear. At least I love having solidarity with you, at least.
One thing I will point out is, look, I believe the Browns invested $250 million guaranteed dollars in Deshaun Watson. Mm-hmm. Every team's trying to win a Super Bowl. They legitimately have a roster that could actually do some damage. I believe they're going into this offense. This is no longer a Nick Chubb-centric offense, but that's a good thing. I believe they're going to spread the field with 3 receivers. This is the first time in Nick Chubb's career he's going to see light boxes. The terror that he could do. He's still going to get his touches, but when you're spreading the field out, this is a different look for him. He was 96 percentile yards after contact last year, and Nick Chubb at the second level is dangerous. And now you're telling me there's going to be one more defensive back on the field. So yes, I do think the work's going to be there. Like Nate said, there is some receiving upside, but the damage he's going to do on his touches, I want to be crazy, but I could see a 6-yard per carry season. He's had 5.5s against stacked boxes. Let's move on. So in the off season, the Baltimore Ravens potentially went through an identity shift. This team, aside from 2 years ago when they lost all 3 of their starting running backs to season-ending injuries in August, they often will run up to 54% of the time, which is like way, way, way out there. Maybe New England can get in that surface on an occasional year, but they are so far the outlier. So they bring in offensive coordinator Todd Monken, who definitely loves the passing game. He'll throw deep on early downs when the defense is a little heavier. And they bring in receiving backup. Odell Beckham is in his 30s, coming off an ACL. They're hoping to get Bateman back from the foot injury. Anyway, they also draft Zay Flowers. Who do you like in this receiving attack, Nate, and why?
Day in, day out goes, and Zay Flowers moves up that ADP chart, and he moves ahead of those other 2 receivers you just talked about. According to RotoWire ADP, he's now ahead of both of Beckman and Bateman for good reason. Beckman, as you mentioned, getting older. And I don't want to say that because I'm 10 years older than the guy, and that's, debilitating sometimes. But that, and then Rashad Bateman, and I'm far from a physician, but I can tell you a cortisone shot post Lisfranc surgery is never a great situation. So I worry about that. And I got to tell you, I love camp reports. But when Peter King comes out and says he's the best receiver, best rookie, at least that he's watched in the camps that he's been to, which was only 6, but at the same time, he elaborated on that, and he said the corners were having to interfere when they had him in press coverage, and he was able to cut and elude and evade when he had non-press coverage when they were playing off. And so I get the feeling that that's going to lead to him and Matt Harmon over reception perception will probably come the end of the season say that he was able to beat both man and zone. Couple that with the opportunity of a Todd Monken offense, which will go more vertical than I think the running game, especially with concerns of J.K. Dobbins. Everything really leads to probably Mark Andrews, but there's got to be another piece to that. And I think that's where Zay Flowers has the highest ceiling of those 3. There's a chance that all 3 of them get their piece of the pie, and it brings down the ceiling for each one. But I like what I've seen so far. I mean, at BC, he had 2 things that really stood out. He was a target freak and he was a touchdown freak. And so those 2 things, if you give me that in the NFL, I'll take all day, especially on an offense that should score as much as they will. Questions, of course, with Lamar Jackson passing upside, but we saw it just a few years back. He's capable of doing that, and we're seeing that more with the offensive schemes leading to these rush first quarterbacks have the touchdown upside that I think he's presented. So where Zay Flowers is going, which was, wide receiver like 50-ish. Now he's up to wide receiver 41. I'm still comfortable with him as my wide receiver 3, so few spots ahead. This isn't even to say, jump the shark and go way high up, but take him at the 41 spot and get true RB or wide receiver 3 upside, maybe with 2, and you can take those guys. Take the Chubb early. Don't take the receivers early. I'm not saying don't, but when you do, don't feel uncomfortable that you're going to be stuck with some of these lesser guys. Zay Flowers is your 3, could return really good value.
Absolutely. And look, I know I mentioned earlier how run heavy this organization was. And I don't think with Monken in, they're all of a sudden going to be the Chiefs throwing the ball. But even a 5% shift where they're passing 51% of the time as opposed to, the mid. I know that 2019 MVP season by Lamar Jackson might be an outlier, but like Nate said, he's shown, and it was like not a high volume passing attack. He can get it done. And with the weapons he has, there's no defense that's going to go into the game being able to say, all right, well, we got to just put all our resources on Zay Flowers. Probably not going to happen. It's a real optimal situation for him to be in. And Nate, I think that's a very astute pickup going Zay Flowers. And, because people are still drafting, Bateman a little bit later, Odell Beckham. People are thinking, but Beckham, I'm not really excited because he's 30. We haven't seen him in a while. There's going to be some drop off there. So, it's a great call on Zay Flowers. Now, you're going to give us another receiver here. We're going to go receiver heavy in this show. The Houston Texans, overall building franchise, but they get the number 1 pick in the draft, and they get Bryce Young, their quarterback of the future. And who do you like in that receiving group to come out and be a viable fantasy option, Nate?
And he's been the talk of at least fantasy and frames and a lot of the circles. We're a Nico Collins group, and I love Nico. I love what the upside, especially for a guy at the wide receiver 56, I believe right now at RotoWire ADP, he's going at. Everything is just trending in the right direction. We go from 2021 to 2022. His yards per route run increases by almost a full, 3/4 of a yard, which is huge. We go from Davis Mills to CJ Stroud, which is clearly an upgrade in my opinion. But I guess we'll let others decide on that. and the target volume, or at least the unoccupied targets, vacated targets is probably the right word I'm looking for, which good job, Nate finally pulled it out of the air, is, we had 88 targets to Brandon Cooks, which are gone. We had really 49 targets to Jordan Akins, which are probably not going to be utilized. Dalton Schultz will occupy some of them, of course, but then you have other missing little pieces to that offense that, like Dare Ogunbowale. Good Lord. I used to be good at saying that. I know, but I was so good at saying that. I feel like I was out of practice. It's been 2 years since I had to say the name, and I hope to not have to say it again. Some of these guys are occupying 25 to 40 targets, which doesn't seem like much, but all those little marbles adding to the jar, eventually Nico Collins can occupy those. The big thing with him for me is that connection and that familiarity and the trust. Because if you look for a big receiver that has good contested catch rate, that to me immediately screams more targets going to get funneled to him. Last year, of the 16 contested targets that he had, he caught 12 of them, which was incredible. Fantasy points, depending upon who you look at, had 9 of 14. Both excellent rates for contested catch numbers. I'm great with that. The Houston was 29th in total points last year, 29th in passing grade, 31st in positive EPA. Everything is negative except when Nico Collins was on the field. When he was on the field, he had a 20% target rate plus. He had 23% of the total team yardage. He, in those games, and this is a new little stat that I really love looking at too, is first read targets. When was he the first read? And that's with the Brandon Cooks on the field too. So Brandon Cooks has always been the first read, or at least one of the first reads. Nico Collins had 56 first read targets, which was the 22nd most during that stretch in the NFL. Now, I am not going to say he's going to be a top 22 receiver, but all those little marbles building to my ADP and my overall upside jar, I think that we could very easily see a wide receiver 3. I think he leads the team in targets. And if you can get a wide receiver 56, that leads that team, whichever team it is, in respective targets, there's value.
And where he wins the best is on the perimeter. And look, there's a lot of zone in today's NFL.
Mm-hmm.
And some of the outside receivers who aren't your Justin Jeffersons or Jamar Chases of the world, these other outside primary receivers are not seeing the amount of coverage that the Jeffersons and Chases are. More the zone and the worry about the middle of the field. So we're seeing some of these, third tier X receivers. We're seeing them at an advantage in today's NFL. And I think that's going to continue for Collins. And I've liked Collins since his rookie year. And he missed some time both years. But we definitely, as you mentioned, Nate, saw growth last year. But that injury risk is baked in the ADP. You're getting them outside of the top 50 receivers. So you have an opportunity to pounce on this. Nate, you're on to another good one here, but Nico Collins is a player, well after 100 picks into a draft, you definitely can add him to your roster, and I think your team's going to benefit greatly. We have one more you're going to cover today. So over in Pittsburgh, obviously George Pickens is the big name. He was an impressive rookie. From a skill set standpoint, man, if he ended up on a couple different teams with a gunslinger quarterback, he might be already putting up 1,200-yard seasons as a rookie. But that said, got Pat Freiermuth. But there's a receiver in here that I think has seen his ADP drop quite a bit since the last year or two. Who do you like in that receiving group, Nate?
Yeah, and that's Diontae. And Diontae Johnson has been one of the ones I hear his name probably mentioned as much as anybody. So I hate to use him in this situation and think it's just a bandwagon approach. But I mean, the numbers and the system, and not the Pittsburgh system, but the system of drafting wide receivers in fantasy all lead to Diontae Johnson having a better than ADP season. Currently right now, he has moved up a couple spots. He's right around wide receiver 30, which is ridiculous. If I took the name away and I said, let's talk about the wide receivers who over the last 3 seasons have had 140 plus targets. Now I know the past, with the extra game could probably bring that down, but well, we're talking about emphasis, right? That's what we're supposed to do, Jim. We're supposed to talk about something that stands out. Let's talk about the wide receivers that have had 140 plus targets over the last 3 seasons. Devontae Adams, Stephon Diggs, Diontae Johnson.
That's it.
There you go. That's it. And those 3, if you look at each one of them, obviously would never be drafted as wide receiver 30 because that's just too far to fall. Even assuming he doesn't nearly catch, maybe the catch rate goes down because it's Kenny Pickett, but it's a second-year Kenny Pickett. I'm still comfortable that there's going to be growth. Matt Canada leaving would be helpful, but at the end of the day, there's not much you can do about that. You're gonna do what you're gonna do. We saw growth towards the end of the season. So, number one, opportunity, of course, again, he's gonna be a target monster. Pickens will eat into it. You touched on that, but comfort level, where he's able for ADOT and situation probably will lead to Diontae. Those first read throws will go Diontae's way. Here's where it really failed, and we all know this. The red zone, the touchdowns. I have to go back to, let's see, I went as far back as 2015 to find a receiver with 130 targets and less than 3 touchdowns, and there were like 6 of them. And it was last year, 2 of them, Chris Godwin and Diontae Johnson. Robbie Anderson, or whatever his name is now.
Exactly.
2020. Robert Woods in 2019. Julio Jones, which, kind of started that touchdown worry. Julian Edelman and Mike Evans back in 2015. So the list is on one hand, I can tell you. And then if you take that even further and you look and you go, all right, well, maybe those guys didn't have a ton of red zone targets. Well, that's not Diontae Johnson either. In red zone target ranks over the last 3 years, he's been 12th, 10th, and then 35th back in 2020. But so the last 2 years, top 12 red zone targets, 16 and 20 respectively. If you look at the red zone, the average fantasy points scored by wide receivers in the red zone for wide receivers with at least 15 red zone targets over the last few years, they averaged 38 points on red zone targets alone. So obviously higher upside for touchdowns, etc. Last year, Diontae scored 5 points of the targets that he received. I know that that's just nitpicking little stats and little features, but it builds a lens to the story of why his numbers were so down last year and why there's value for you to take him at the wide receiver 30 and get wide receiver 2, not probably wide receiver 1. The offense and situation probably drags him down just a little bit, but where he's going in that grouping, again, lends to why I'm comfortable taking the running backs early and building these target hungry and target volume monsters right around that same spot. Let's find a little piece that I did not even know about Diontae Johnson. I watched him play enough, but I didn't realize how efficient he was at breaking tackles. I know he's shifty and everything. He was 7th in broken tackles last year, and he was 8th in broken tackles the year before that. So he's top 10 in broken tackles 2 years. So that's not just like an outlier last year. It's a consistent trend that we've seen. So I hope those pieces of the puzzle build to a few more targets coming in the draft range for your listeners for Diontae.
It's a recency bias discount what we have here. He's a proven producer, like you said, 147, I believe, targets last year, and that opportunity was still there. It didn't quite work out as expected, but that's not going away. Like Nate said, Nate gave you an entire case to go with. And I do think, again, that's another choice that makes sense. You could get him outside the top 24 receivers, just outside the top 60 picks, right around there. Great opportunity to get a super high volume player. Nate, make sure you take a few minutes or to pitch yourself, what you have going on, where people can follow you. Love to hear it.
Yeah. As you said, obviously follow Fantasy and Frames before me. The group of guys they have there that Jorge's put together is incredible. And girls, I shouldn't say guys, everybody. We have such a wonderful group and family there. That's just at Fantasy and Frames at Twitter, X, whatever. It's also at, fantasyframes.com. And so go check out all the work over there. That's more important than following me. But if you want to, you can, as Jim said, at Nate Markham. It's there at the bottom of the screen. I have the Shoot the Gap podcast as an IDP podcast that I host on Friday nights. Sometimes it's Thursday. We shift things around depending upon how busy the schedule gets. But then the Fantasy and Frames podcast network has, I think we're up to like 5 different shows, from redraft to IDP to best ball to dynasty. And then coming up soon, this time here, Sunday morning, will be occupied by our pregame show, which we do for 2 to 3 hours sometimes, talking about all things leading to the games. And then if you happen to be at the expo this coming weekend, please stop by and say hi. I'll be involved. I'll be with the auction panel IDP, or the auction panel with Drew Davenport. And then I'll be on the IDP panel with Gary Davenport. 2 Davenports. Look at that. I didn't even think about that.
Well, me either. And
that's something.
I took a picture with both of them last year. And man, I'm slow though.
I am too.
That's the story of my life. Nate, this was a treat. And again, if you're not following Nate Fantasy and Frames, you really need to. This is some high level stuff. They're not doing the same stuff everybody else. Their approach is very, very unique. They have, again, understand football first. And I think that allows us all to become better fantasy players. So Nate, thank you again for joining and talking football with me. Thanks to everyone else for joining us. Please join again tomorrow, which is Monday, 11 a.m. Eastern. We'll have Lauren Carpenter on then. We'll look forward to talking to Lauren. Everybody have a great day, and thanks for hanging out with us.
See ya.